Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome or welcome back to the ADB Circular Economy Forum 2025 Advancing a Circular Economy for a Sustainable Future. So, just in case you don't know what you're going to listen to this afternoon, this track, Auditorium 1, is for legal frameworks and policy. So this is an exciting panel because we're going to look at the global and then national and then local case study for policies and frameworks. So we'll see how these legal frameworks and policies can enhance or support a circular economy. So my name is Ana Oposa. I am the Marine Conservation and Circular Economy Specialist of ADB's project to reduce marine litter in the region. I'm also one of the organizers of this event, and I will be your moderator and your MC for this afternoon. So this is going to be our program flow. We will start with Rocky Guzman. He is going to be talking about the Global Plastics Treaty. So earlier, if you were in the panel, if you watched the panel this morning, they kept talking about how this can make an impact on national programs. And then we have a lot of interest in extended producer responsibility or EPR. So Sarah will be talking about this using the Republic of Korea as the case study. And then we're going to zoom in on a local case study and see how Quezon City, which is the city just next to where we are, on what they're doing to implement a plastic bag ban. Or let's see what else they have planned in the future. And then we have a discussant from Indonesia. She was highlighted earlier this morning, but she is the founder of PT 3D Oasis. So that's a lot of work on plastics recycling and integrating the informal waste workers. So we'll hear a little bit more about their work as well. And just a few reminders before we begin. We have to keep doing this because we don't know like if people were there in the morning. So we'll just do a brief check of the rules of engagement, as we call them. So first is be present. Make sure that you are listening, you are observing, you are absorbing what is being talked about. Please keep your phones on silent and other gadgets as well. We're going to be hearing like MS Teams notifications or what else, like the alarms in case you have to take your medicine, things like that. So just put them on silent. Engagement will be done online. We're going to test the AHA slides in just a few moments. Please network with intent. I was so happy to see people going around during the coffee breaks, talking, introducing themselves to each other. So let's have more of that. And there is going to be a networking break after this. And the rumors are true. Indeed, there will be the infamous ADB crinkles later in the afternoon. And we put this in the end so that you really stay. So then that will be a reward for powering through this afternoon. And last is to have fun. It's not worth doing if it's not fun. So let's make sure that you network with intent and have fun while doing it. So introduce yourselves, ask questions, be curious about each other. Other reminders, the restrooms can be found on either side of the auditoriums. Of course, since we are in Auditorium 1, the nearest one would be on this side. And then coffee and snacks will be available outside later. No food and beverages inside. So I can hear people like chugging whatever they have on hand. But you can probably drink water, although don't quote me on that. But you can take your snacks outside. There are ADB briefs outside as well. You can take them. Have you gotten your notebooks and your plantable pencils? Yes? Okay, some of you have, some of you have not. So hopefully they will still be available in the afternoon afterwards. Yes, okay, I got an approval that they will still be there. There are also charging stations at the back. So if your gadget is low battery, you can charge it there at the back. You can put your phones and your laptops and tablets there. And finally, if you are on social media, please feel free to post about this, promote it. We still have another day tomorrow. So please use the hashtag ADB Advancing Circularity, tag at ADB Environment on X, ADB_HQ on Instagram, and at Asian Development Bank on LinkedIn. And please, I saw people taking group photos. For those of you who are not in the Philippines has been called the selfie capital of the world. So don't be surprised if you are seeing people taking selfies with each other or groofies. But please, if you post it, make sure that they also look good, that it's not just you who looks good and the other person has their eyes closed like that. So make sure you also have their consent when you post. If you want to learn more about the event, please download the event app, and that's really what it's called, the event app. It's a purple, it doesn't look so purple here, but it is purple on your phone. You can access more information about the event there. So now let's test if our AHA slides work. I invite you to, oh, nawala. Oh, can we, ayan, okay. Can we please check if you're able to access the AHA slides? If you, for some reason, can't use the QR code, you can use ahaslides.com/CE track 1. So let's see how many people are there. We have a full house. This is very exciting. A lot of people are interested in policy and legal frameworks. This is one of my favorite topics as well. In another universe, I could have been a lawyer, but instead I am thinking about laws a lot. So let's look at the first question, just a very simple question, which is, how was your lunch? I am so full. I am still hungry. And I didn't get to eat because I was too busy chatting. The beef rendang was particularly good, I must say. Yes, I see some nods agreeing with me. The dessert was also pretty good. I love eating here in ADB. It's always something I look forward to. Okay, so a lot of people are full. I hope you're also full from the conversations you've been having. Wow. The knowledge that you've been absorbing. Okay, let's go to the next question, which is more related to the topic. Let's see, what questions do you have about circular economy and legal frameworks and policy? So this is kind of our segue to get into the topic. While we're waiting, it says participants are typing. One of the questions I always have when it comes to circular economy and legal frameworks in general is, how do we translate what is on paper in action? I remember a few years ago, I was working on this project and I had a bit of an existential crisis, and I actually messaged our first speaker, who I'll introduce shortly. And I was asking him, because he's a lawyer, like, what is the point of having laws if we can't implement them? Like, there has to be a kind of level of ambition, but also a certain level of being realistic. So how do we meet those two halves, right? So I feel like I'm still living the questions. There's no perfect answer to that, but it's still great to be thinking about it and living the questions. So these are just some of the questions. Oh, this is a good one. Maybe our speakers can also find ways to integrate these questions in their presentations. Why is it all about plastics? That is true. I'm tempted to answer, but I have to remember I'm not a speaker. I'm the moderator. Okay, so let's see. Is there any compulsory criteria or benchmark to quantify the benefit of CE? How can we achieve the goal of a circular economy? What concrete policy measures have you seen in practice that can be used, that can enable circularity and reuse? Ooh, how to balance regulations versus free market? Is there sufficient investment in scalable alternative packaging solutions that industries can realistically support? Wow, big questions. And then there's a long one here. Maybe we can answer this during the Q&A later. So I'll go back to the slide later so that we can pick up on some of these questions. But it seems like we have a lot to tackle in this session and a lot of eager faces and ready to listen. So why don't we start things off with our first speaker, Roger Joseph Guzman, or Rocky as he is often called. He's an environmental lawyer and policy specialist with an extensive background in ocean issues. He has held positions in various nonprofits and international organizations where he led projects from marine conservation and plastic pollution to fisheries management and strengthening environmental rights. Rocky obtained his master's in environmental policy at Duke University and is the Deputy Director of the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law. He's also our team's international governance policy and legal specialist and our go-to for all things global plastics treaty. So let's all welcome Rocky.
Thank you so much, Anna, as always, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's a difficult time to be starting this afternoon at this unholy hour after lunch, but I'll make this as painless as possible. And I'll be talking about quite an exciting topic for this afternoon, which is the progress on the Global Plastics Treaty. We've heard this morning a number of times that how this could drive circular economy at the global level, and how it could drive policy reform at the national level as well, including at the local level. So I'm going to discuss what's been happening at the global level now in the negotiations, in the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, as we call it, or it's the negotiation round in the treaty. So let me just start by context. You may have heard that this process started 2022 formally by constituting the INC, which is the negotiating committee. The basis was a UNEA resolution, or UN Environment Assembly resolution entitled End Plastic Pollution Towards an International Legally Binding Instrument. And the mandate was to deliver a finalized treaty for adoption by this year into 2025. Now, what we're doing now builds on the negotiation rounds that happened since 2023. We had in Uruguay, in France, in Kenya, in Ottawa, and the last one, which was INC 5, happened in Busan, in South Korea last year, November to December. And the original objective, as I said, according to UNEA Assembly, is to conclude the negotiations by the end of last year so that it would be finalized this year already for potential adoption. But that didn't happen, and I will tell why. The countries were unable to reach a consensus, and thus the countries will reconvene on the second part of the fifth session of the INC, which will be happening in Geneva in August, in 2 months from now. So that's where we are right now in terms of the Global Plastics Treaty. Now, as I focus on key issues and the contentious issues in particular, I'd like to focus on two things that have been recurring in the negotiations since we started 3 years ago. And the first one is the debate on having provisions on plastics and chemicals and its regulations, as well as supply and sustainable production. And this includes possible production caps and all those kinds of regulations. So there have been continuous debates on whether there should be provisions on regulation of plastic products, the value chain, and identifying and regulating chemicals of concerns. Proposals range from having no provision at all, as this might not be part, according to other parties, that it should not be part of the scope, but also having country-led measures to restrict production and having global frameworks in lists or potential annexes. Now, that's one of the contentious issues, and the other one is on having a provision on sustainable production and supply. Now, this could entail having targets to reduce the production and consumption of primary plastic polymers to sustainable levels. Now, some delegations have opposed addressing, including production, as they contend that it falls outside the mandate of the treaty. But a number of countries also, actually a lot of countries, contend that the life cycle of plastic should encompass all, from production, downstream, from production, midstream, all the way downstream to waste management. So that's the continuous negotiation and the topic of debate among the countries right now in the negotiations. Now, it's not all debates. There have been some agreement on key issues, including the inclusion of waste management and downstream solutions. And that would be part of there has been some agreement that that would be part of the treaty. And also there has been a debate whether on the level of mandatoriness or the bindingness of these provisions, and whether the scope would be at the global level or whether it would be more national level, tailor-fit to the countries for implementation. Now, for what's happening, the dynamic right now in the negotiations, During the Busan negotiation last year, countries with shared interest on key issues presented their positions, and this was one of the first times they did it. On the other side, we have the High Ambition Coalition, which is a group of ambitious countries that wanted to include production in the scope, including Pacific, Small Island Developing States, and the African Group, calling for a comprehensive approach that would include production and regulation of production. On the other side, we have a like-minded group, they call it, which is composed of a group led by oil-producing countries that would like to narrow the scope of the treaty to focus on downstream waste management. And that would effectively exclude production and production caps in the regulation. Now, Rwanda, for example, on behalf of 85 countries, reaffirmed the need for a strong treaty, and Mexico, also representing a huge number of countries, called for clear, legally binding obligations to phase out harmful plastic products and chemicals of concern. Now, as per an ADB, this has also been a key issue that has cropped up a lot of times, and that is how to implement it and how to find the financing to implement the plastics treaty later on. Now, during the negotiations, there have been a number of contentions on how to do it. The first one is on by the developed countries. The position is to use established mechanisms, including the Global Environment Facility, and this would likely rely on voluntary contributions from all parties. And developed parties also highlight the use of innovative finance instruments to raise and mobilize funding. Now, as opposed to a number of developing countries, which position is to have a new, dedicated, independent multilateral fund focused really on the implementation of the treaty later on, with developed countries contributing along with public and private sources. Now, they highlight the need for stable and predictable finance for implementation, and that's why it would be important to have a dedicated funding mechanism for this purpose. Now, the fund could later on provide financial resources by grants or concessional basis with specific focus and priority for developing countries and small island developing states. Now, I just want to focus a bit on scaling up finance under the plastics treaty, and a lot of banks, development banks and finance institutions are looking at how this will play out. So the financing program is really important because it will be supporting the activities under the means of implementation under the treaty, and that includes capacity building, technical assistance, technology transfer, all the digital innovation that we're talking about today. But the key also is when the parties try to create this multilateral fund, to be effective, countries should commit to clear goals, incorporating both public and private funding sources, recognizing that public funding is not enough and we have to mobilize finance from private sources. Now, we can do this through harnessing innovative finance models, including blue bonds. We have heard about that. Public-private partnerships, extended producer responsibility schemes, which is both a regulatory and fiscal measure that could raise funds. We'll be discussing that later. And also potential pollution fees to generate a sustainable revenue stream. There has also been quite renewed interest on what we call outcome-based financing, which ties financial investments or the disbursement of funds to measurable results. In this case, usually it is the reduction of plastic pollution, a reduction of plastic being released to the environment, for instance. Now, implementation requires, what I said, additional mobilization and redirection of finance towards emerging economies, which need them the most, and integrating private sector participation, so it's all encompassing both from public and private funding sources. And there has been some models that we can look at, including in particular the Montreal Protocol, the implementation fund, and how they would implement it using this specific dedicated fund. For the next steps in the GPT negotiations, I know it's an exciting time, and it's especially exciting because we are supposed to have the final one on August. That's what they say, and that's what we always try to hope. And the chair's text would be the foundation for these future deliberations. Mind you, all elements on this chair's text are still in brackets, meaning it's still open to modifications, But at this stage, we are looking at like growing consensus on certain aspects on the downstream waste management and just transition, for instance, but a number of issues, including production, chemicals of concern, primary plastic polymers, and supply, all that are going to be part of heated debates again in Geneva. Now, the past few weeks have been quite useful as well because there has been momentum created. I just came from the Nice in France for the UN Ocean Conference, and there has been a lot of announcements of having wake-up calls from groups of states that calls for an ambitious plastics treaty. And this include the Nice wake-up call for the ambitious plastic treaty, which calls for caps on plastic production, inclusion of chemicals of concern within the provisions, as well as having a full life cycle approach that includes production within the scope of this treaty. Now, you may ask, what might happen, Rocky, if there would be no consensus in this Geneva negotiation round? Now, that might be a problem, but also this could lead to another rethinking once we have the UN Environment Assembly meeting again towards the end of this year in December, and that could open the possibility for various options. There could also be a potential change, for instance, of procedure or modality, and there could also be a change in mandate. So that might be a possibility. It could be good for some, it could be bad for others. It depends on what the position is, but that might be a possibility if there's no conclusion with the next negotiation round in Geneva. Okay, so I put here an analysis of potential ways forward towards the plastics treaty, especially at the state of play it is now. And I've said we have the consensus approach. And this might be where we're going now. And it might be, you might be familiar with this because it sounds like the least common denominator approach, where we remain within the process and we stick with the ones that we have consensus on. And then that would mean that we would have to scale back on the level of ambition. Then there would be a focus on areas of consensus, but there could be it could be open to other areas that could be agreed upon later on. Now that's the consensus approach. The other one is to have possibly another process that is outside the current UN process. So this could be initiated outside the treaty process that we have now. And a number of countries may start their own high ambition treaty, and that could in effect create de facto norms, including potential provisions related to dealing with non-parties, and that would create an enabling environment at the global level for the plastics treaty and how it's regulated. It's not ideal, it might be fragmented at this stage, but that could be a possibility if the ambitious countries want to have a treaty that would show the level of ambition in the text. And lastly, we also have the potential differential treatment, where countries and parties could adjust treaty structure depending on their needs and their wants. So other countries may have different timelines, other countries may have different requirements and opt-out options for specific articles if they are not comfortable in complying or are agreeing to those articles. So these are just some of the potential pathways right now. Again, we don't know what might happen. I don't have a crystal ball. But let's see in August what's going to happen. But for sure, there's a lot of clamor to have this finished at this stage because this has gone way, way beyond the mandate that has been given for this process. So that's a quick rundown of the plastics treaty negotiations. And at this point, I'd just like to provide some insights on how ADB specifically has been supporting this process. So throughout these sessions this morning, we have heard that ADB has been supporting in both policy reform through the policy-based lending modality, for instance, and investment. And we could use that for countries to fulfill their country obligations. So this could include supporting the creation of enabling policies, the regulations, investments in plastic waste management, for instance, and knowledge and regional cooperation like what we're doing now. Now, this TA that we have been part of has been doing that, and we have been supporting, for example, in enabling conditions, including data and metrics to support the policies, and national and local level policy reform, as well as the digitalization of the plastics value chain, especially that would be important for monitoring later on. We have also been supporting financing on the financing side, especially on specific technologies, for instance, as well as knowledge and capacity building. Now, once this treaty ideally has been adopted, let's say this year or the next, it'll now go to the states to implement that. And the plastics treaty, as it now stands, has a slew of options for the means of implementation, as we call it. And the ADB can support it through the GPT implementation itself, including investing for waste infrastructure, MRFs, for instance, enabling frameworks, including reforms in laws and regulations, financing schemes such as the Extended Producers Responsibility Scheme, and monitoring. And the ADB could also support an innovation and high-level technology that could ensure the alignment with the technology transfer provisions under this treaty, but also like spur innovation, including deposit return schemes, alternatives, reverse logistics. All these models could be supported by ADB. Again, ADB will continue to support technical assistance in capacity building, including exchange of best practices among jurisdictions, and also ensuring alignment of private sector towards the goals of the treaty and the country's fulfillment of their obligations, and regional cooperation, including what we're doing now, knowledge sharing. Specific instances or specific examples where ADB can support, for example, and ADB has been actually supporting it, is the formulation of national action plans, which will be required to implement this treaty at the national level, and also innovative finance mechanisms, including EPR, as well as digital roadmaps and solutions at the national and local level to ensure a pathway towards digital solutions to monitor progress and compliance with the treaty. Now, to put it in more tangible terms, I'd just like to give a quick overview of what we did in Indonesia. And it's a good example because it provides, this bucket of interventions that ADB has supported that would support the implementation of the plastics treaty. So this policy program was approved in May 2024, and 500 million is being invested by ADB for their policy-based lending program on marine debris policy. And this encompasses, supporting policy reform in plastic waste management, for instance, and plastic production and consumption reduction, including waste reduction by producers, minimum recycled content. All these lead to the policy target of Indonesia, of the government, under the National Action Plan to reduce by 70% plastic waste leakage by this year. So this has been a number of policy reform support that ADB has been giving to Indonesia. And this is also complemented by other interventions, including providing support at the local level, including in Cirebon City, where ADB provided support for a digital roadmap for plastic waste leakage reduction, including a framework for local collection and all those, as well as investment in the private sector, including a $144 million blue loan to Indorama Ventures, which is a recycling facility, also PT Albert Reedy, that looks at the downstream part, but also to a grant to Alner, a social venture that looks at more the midstream part on reusable packaging and refilling. So you could see with the Indonesian example that it encompasses most everything from the policy side that ADB could support in policy-based lending modality, but also in the investment side through all this private sector investment support and grants as well. So that is also happening in the Philippines, and we're looking now at a policy-based lending facility that is being extended to the government in preparation for implementation, as well as investments in the digital space. Now, I'd like to end here that ADB has a huge role, especially in this region, both in terms of policy and investment. Policy, as we know, once this global framework is in place, countries would then be in position to ensure reforms at their national legal framework. Now, the ADB can assist in the identification, preparation, and implementation of both government and private sector actions and investments. For governments, this could be through the policy-based lending modality, as I've said. And for investments, we also have other instruments, but it would be guided by the ADB Ocean Finance Framework, as well as the Green and Blue Bonds Framework, which specifically have this kinds of investments at the marine debris and the blue economy space, and they have specific safeguards for that. Now, this would be important as member countries of the ADB prepare, a lot of people also here, prepare for the implementation of the treaty, and ADB could offer the necessary policy and financial support to meet their obligations. Now, in targeting these obligations, again, ADB is supporting this through a holistic approach to enable a circular economy for plastics. This comprehensive package composed of support to the government as well as private sector action would be important and because it would support a system-wide transition to a circular economy. And this would also provide a replicable model across different actors, different sectors and countries across the region. So I will end there. Thank you very much for the time, and I'll be happy to take more of your questions later on. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Rocky. So he mentioned that he just came from Nice, from the UN Oceans. He actually just arrived last night, yesterday. So fresh from France, right? Okay. So when Rocky was saying that in August is going to be the final version, I was thinking of, you know how when we send documents to people we work with and it's like finalist, final version 6, like that. So I think this one is going to be final version 5. Is the INC 5? 5.2. Okay, so the UN has not escaped the revisions of that we also do. But the Global Plastics Treaty is so interesting because 20 years ago, we couldn't even imagine that we would need a global treaty just focusing on plastics, right? But then it also makes me think about the question that was posed earlier in the slides, where it's like, why do we need a specific treaty just focusing on plastics? Why not? Why wasn't it a global solid waste treaty? So maybe we can ask that question later. But if you do want to ask more questions, you can go back to the same slides, or you can go back to the same link or the same QR code. So it's ahaslides.com/CEtrack1. So you can keep sending your messages there, your questions there as we continue the conversation. So our next speaker, from the global perspective, we are focusing now on a national perspective. And when I was walking around earlier talking to some friends, a lot of people said that they were interested in this specific panel because they wanted to learn more about extended producer responsibility, which is our next topic. So our speaker is Sarah Lim. She specializes in sustainable development and policy analysis in Asia and the Pacific with a focus on evidence-based policy analysis, data visualization, and program management. Since joining ADB Korea Climate Technology Hub in 2023, she has contributed knowledge initiatives on waste management and the circular economy, including briefing materials on Korea's national waste policy and the EPR system. So let's all welcome Sarah.
All right. Good afternoon. Let me double check. Okay, perfect. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah from ADB Korea Climate Technology Hub. I'm based in Seoul, and I fly all the way to Manila to attend this event. And it with my great pleasure to share the Korea's experiences. To briefly introduce me, I am a researcher, the consultant at the K-Hub. And one of my roles is to support and produce the knowledge products. And EPR is one of the topics that was covered by the waste management policies. Korea's model provides some takeaways for the on a phase policy designs and development of infrastructure, mobilizing the private capitals with a strong stakeholder engagement. And I hope this adds values to the Circular Economy Forum and paves the way to be benchmarked in different contexts. Throughout the presentation, I will introduce the EPR in Korea, touch upon the ecosystem, followed by the details about how targets are set and fees are calculated. And also I will talk about the 4 key enablers with the takeaways. So extended producer responsibility was officially launched in 2003 in Korea. And the system requires the producers to take the full responsibilities for the entire life cycle of the products. Life cycle covers the every stage from manufacturing, sales, the consumption to collection, transport, and finally the recycling. This slide compares the EPR implementation stages across the APEC economies. Looking at the global context, each country is at a different stage. And you might see some countries covered with different colors, but in the same country because they are at the transitional periods. And Korea stands out as one of the few countries that have implemented the mandatory EPR with full legal enforcement and nationwide system and strong monitoring mechanisms. This diversity shows that countries adopt the EPR based on the policy capacity, market structure, and the waste challenges. However, Korea's experiences provides valuable lessons for the countries that are designing or scaling up their own system. You might ask a question why Korea has to implement the EPR, and it's a mix of the different factors. Rapid economic growth, industrialization, and urbanization, all of which contributed to the rise in the waste volumes. Waste also became more complex, and it made incineration or landfilling no longer viable options for Korea. So in response, the government of Korea made a significant leap forward by embracing a waste management system based on the polluter pay principles. I'm not sure how many of you have visited Korea, but Korea is mandatory. It's like all the consumers have to purchase, individuals have to purchase the waste bags to dispose their non-recyclable waste. And it was started back in 1995. Korea introduced the concept of the waste charge system, and Korea adopted the volume-based waste fee systems. And the first method adopted by the Korean government was the waste bags. The sources of waste, such as household and industries, were required to dispose the non-recyclable waste through the waste bags, while the recyclable waste are collected by the municipal government. And on top of the waste bags, RFID weight method was introduced, particularly for the food waste, and the stickers for the large home appliances. So extended producer responsibility complements the volume-based waste fee system because it covers the items that are not covered by the volume-based waste fee system. So EPR, introduced in 2003, gradually expanded the coverage. Initially, it has been 20 years and so far. So initially covered the 15 types of the items, and now it's 28 types, 24 products, and 4 packaging materials. And products vary by batteries like e-waste, like lubricants, fishing nets, and the power communication lines. And 4 types of the packaging materials include the paper pack, glass bottle, metal can, and plastic package. All manufacturers and importers of the products subject to EPR are responsible to meet the annual recycling targets. But packaging materials have some exemptions. It is because the many businesses handling the packaging materials are small and medium-sized. And so there are exemptions based on the sales amounts and the volume. Since EPR embraces every stage of waste, the system actively involves the multiple players, and there are 8 stakeholders groups. The Ministry of Environment has a dedicated division that oversees the EPR system. This ministry develops and revises the legal frameworks and announces the annual recycling rates by item. And under the Ministry of Environment, we have Korea Environment Corporation. This is a public agency, and the resource circulation is one of the core businesses. So KECO has about 100 staff who are dedicated to handle the EPR implementations with 8 regional offices. And this body reviews and approves the EPR implementation plans and verifies the sales and import records and inspects the recycling performance and penalizes the non-compliance. Local governments also take a critical role because they are responsible for collection of the waste within their districts. And recycling companies are under the contracts with the responsible producers. About 80% of the recycling companies are privately owned, and one of their main revenue channel is the recycling subsidies streamed from the contribution fees from the producers. So we also have a responsible producers. I believe the Philippines refer to them as obliged enterprises, and producers with recycling obligations are defined under the Resource Recycling Act, and they must either fulfill their obligations directly or can delegate their works to the producer responsibility organizations, and we call them PROs. In Korea, we have about 14 PROs, 13 PROs for the products and 1 PRO for the packaging materials, and they're non-profit entities. They are officially designated under the law and approved by the Ministry of Environment. Also, they act as facilitators between the obliged enterprises and the recycling companies. And the one particular thing is that for packaging materials, there is an additional public agency called the Korea Resource Circulation Service Agency. Since 2013, this agency has been working alongside the packaging PRO and as an intermediary agency between packaging PRO and the recycling companies. While the packaging PRO coordinates with the producers, this agency coordinates with the recycling companies. And finally, we must not forget the role of the consumers, because consumers are the responsible for source separations of recyclable waste from the non-recyclables. I think three flows will help you understand how the stakeholders interact with one another. I draw this figure from the information, cash, and product perspectives. The figure on the screen is for the products, and the packaging material will follow. The information flow begins with the Ministry of Environment. So every year, Ministry announces the mandatory recycling rates by item, and based on the targets set by the Ministry, the producers and PROs submit the implementation plans to the KECO, which is the public entity under Ministry of Environment. And KECO oversees the compliance and plays a central role as it collects the performance data, conducts annual inspections, and reports back to the Ministry. The recycling companies also report their results to PROs because their reports is the evidence to get the recycling subsidies, and this completes the information loop. And looking at the cash flow, the producers pay contribution fees to PROs. Then PROs pay the recycling subsidies to the recycling companies based on the verified recycling amount. And contribution fees are based on the unit price, and the unit price is calculated by there is a PRO committee members where the representatives from the different stakeholders groups participate. The decision making on the contribution fee is monitored by the ministry's regulations. The product and waste flow is the physical journey of the products. The producers and importers supply the products to the distributors, who then sell them to the consumers. After consumption, consumers discharge the waste and enters the collected waste enter the formal waste process. And they are sorted by the companies contracted with the local governments, then transported to the recycling companies. The one key difference between the packaging materials and the products is the existence of the Korea Resource Circulation Service Agency. This agency serves as a neutral intermediary agency between the PRO and recycling companies, and it coordinates the entire financial and reporting process. It includes the collection and settlement of the contribution fees and ensures the transparency and review the recycling performance and distribution of the recycling subsidies. The Ministry of Environment launched the Korea Resource Circulation Compliance System. KECO operates the online platform, and we can understand this as a one-step EPR platform which enables easy monitoring and easy reporting. This is designed for the responsible producers and PROs, as well as the voluntary PROs participants, to submit the implementation plans. At the same time, KECO reviews the document submissions, imposes the penalties, and puts public announcements relevant to EPR. This is the timeline. The workflow goes year-round. The current year's performance is evaluated the following year, as seen from the implementation timeline. The timeline starts at the end of December, when the ministry announces the recycling rates. And in January, producers and PROs submit the implementation plans to KECO, and in the following month, by February, KECO reviews approves the submitted plans. And throughout the year, PROs and producers, they work towards fulfilling the recycling mandatory obligations. And the following year, producers submit the previous year's records. And in April 30, producers and PROs their final reports. By July, K-Eco reviews then notifies the producers who didn't comply with the recycling targets and penalize them. And at the end of August, producers have to pay the penalties. On the right-hand side, I put the simple flow charts to feature the contribution fees and penalties for non-compliance. So you might be wondering how the fees are calculated. So all for a second, the recycling rates are capped at a maximum of 0.9 or 90%. These rates are carefully determined considering different factors like the product lifespan, the technology advancements, or the volume of the collected waste. And the mandatory volume is calculated by multiplying the mandatory recycling rate by the product's total volume of the items. This table, rows highlighted in green, is mandatory recycling rates for the packaging materials, and the rest are for the products. And rates vary by item because it has to consider the factors like hazardous components or the environmental control needs. Currently, fluorescent lamps have an exemption with the rate exceeding 0.9 or 90% because the Ministry of the Energy plans to phase out the production of the fluorescent lamp by 2027. So the Ministry of Environment has to comply with the steps, and they put the exceptionally high recycling targets to manage the shrinking volume of the fluorescent lamps. So all responsible producers who delegate their works to the PROs have to pay the contribution fees, and these fees are calculated based on the unit price. The formula is volume times the recycling rates times the unit price per item. If producers fail to meet their mandatory recycling volumes, there will be penalties, and these penalties are calculated based on the shortfall in recycling volume. And for the incentives, if the producer recycles more than the required amount, their extra performance will be banked for next 2 years. The EPR system so far successful in Korea in terms of economic and environment benefits. The number of recycling companies more than doubled, while the responsible producers grew from 2,700 to 12,000. And it saved a total of 7.1 trillion won in landfill cost and created the 22,000 new jobs. It also helped achieve a cumulative reduction of 11.19 tons of CO2 emissions. So far, Korea achieved the 87% of the recycling rates and 100% compliance rates for the packaging materials. The recycling industry's revenue has grown tenfold and since the adoption of the EPR. So the following slides, the last couple of slides, I will feature the 4 key enablers. Korea's EPR comes down to 4 key enablers, which are institutional frameworks, public-private partnerships, integration of the informal sectors, and public awareness. This is the roadmap. Like in 1986, Korea established the Waste Control Act. This was the legal foundation for the waste collection sites, sorting facilities, and treatment plants. And in 1991, nationwide waste separation guidelines were introduced, and municipal governments started to designate the specific days and locations to collect the waste. They are the one who is taking responsibility to collect the waste within their districts. And in 1992, Korea launched the deposit refund system, which is a precursor to the EPR system. Producers prepaid the disposal fees and received the partial refunds, but there was no mandatory recycling rates. And it initially applied to 4 packaging materials, which is milk cartons, glass bottles, cans, and PET bottles. And in 1995, volume-based waste fee system. And in 2002, the government launched the Olbaru system. This is the digital platform for construction and industrial waste. And the following year, EPR was launched. Since 2008, Korea has introduced a series of policies to enhance the recycling quality. This slide is just elaborating more on the roadmaps, and I will leave it to you. Maybe when you have time, you can go over. And second key enabler is the PPP. But while PPP, now EPR is not a classic PPP that involves the long-term concessional agreements or project financing contracts, it can be considered as the regulatory PPP model because it engages the private and public stakeholders and share the responsibilities in waste management. Under EPR, the producers finance and fulfill the recycling obligations, and while the government sets the legal frameworks and local governments gives the concessional loans to the recycling companies to do the feasibility studies and develop their infrastructure. The shared responsibility structure is combined with the transparent regulations. I believe integrating the informal sector into a formal system is one of the biggest challenges that is faced by different countries. And in the case of Korea, the informal workers are mainly the adults aged above 60. And so the local governments jointly work with the Ministry of Welfare, and they work with the junk shops in each district to reach informal workers and provide the targeted services. So informal sector integration is a joint work by local governments, the Ministry of Health and Welfare, NGOs, and social enterprises, because this has to secure the market rates of the waste. And the Ministry of Health and Welfare takes the biggest steps because they have to visit having this like care services, visiting the elders on a regular basis. So yeah, the four key areas are the safety measures, employment, care services, and livelihoods. Last one is the public awareness. It was enhanced through the concerted efforts. Having segregation infrastructure nearby the residential complexes enables the consumers to dispose the waste, and public awareness campaigns on the social media, publications are also available, and economic incentives are use the mobile applications, like the local governments provide the redeemable points to the residential who properly segregate the waste. This is the last slide. I received a guiding question from the Secretariat about what has the government learned from the implementing EPR that could benefit the others. And I'd like to highlight the four key takeaways based on the four key enablers from Korea's experiences. First is the volume-based waste fee system. The Korean government first enacted the laws and established the infrastructure. Then it took 3 years to scale up the volume-based waste fee system. So to have a sustainable waste management system, governments give the responsibilities on the individuals, so they have to pay for what they produce as a source of waste. And it embed the waste separation habits across the society. Second is the phased approach. Korea began EPR in 2003 with 15 types of the products and 11 types of the products and 4 types of the packaging materials, and expanded to 28. And it was started after the volume-based waste fee system to complement one another. And third is the market-based mechanism. Before, all the government, the local government was the one who is taking major responsibilities to collect the waste from their budget and using the public financing. But private capital drives the system now because the EPR and waste bag system, volume-based waste system, require the producers to pay the fees proportional to their market share and creating the cost accountability. Last is the performance-based governance, because the government ensures the transparent and monitoring of the compliance through PROs and their digital platforms. Korea has gone through 20 years to make the EPR mature, and although Korea is definitely not a fit for all solutions, its progress shed lights to the other different countries at the different stages. And other governments can design and systems that work for them by exploring and benchmarking Korea's lessons and move one step closer to the circular economy. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So there are already actually questions in the AHA slides. There are like 3 questions just addressed to you. So I'll show those to you in a bit. But the extended producer responsibility, when Sarah showed the slides of the different stakeholders, and then there was another slide with the diagrams and all these like arrows pointing up, pointing right, pointing left, pointing down. I was thinking, to borrow words from relationship status it's complicated. Like there are just so many moving parts, and it can't be. When we think about extended producer responsibility in our minds, the ambition is for it to be simple so that it's implementable. But actually, in practice, there are so many parts of it that need to work together for it to succeed. I was about to say to success. And just to recap, the four enabling factors. First is having an institutional framework. And we're here, I mean, presumably you're here because you're interested in learning more about policies and the legal framework. Two is public-private partnership. Three is informal sector integration. That was so impressive to have healthcare and housing provided for the informal waste. It's like very aspirational for a lot of the countries. And then four is public awareness. Of course, that involves integrating like consumers and the different other stakeholders to make sure that everybody knows what the goal is and how we can get there. So we have now discussed global, national, and now we move on to local. So if Rocky came from France and Sarah came from Seoul, our next speaker came from Quezon City, just next door. O, diba? A few months ago, I was on this panel for Women's Month, and my co-panelist is our next speaker. And I was very impressed when she shared the story of the Quezon City plastic bag ban. And I just loved how she talked about it with just real talk. Like, it's hard and there was resistance. And I wanted her to speak about this just to give everyone a reality check that in our minds, it seems like it's easy to just ban a product. But when in reality, you actually face a lot of resistance. And it can be complicated as well to implement it. So we invited her and we're very lucky that she found the time to be with us this afternoon. Our next speaker is Dorothy Delarmente Bagting. She was just re-elected. So this is her 6th term as City Councilor of Quezon City. She's also the majority floor leader of the 22nd Quezon City Council and a medical doctor by profession. She's also an environmentalist who has authored several ordinances such as the Green Building Ordinance of Quezon City and the Plastic Ordinances of Quezon City. So let's all welcome Councilor Doray.
Hello, good afternoon. Plastic pollution is one of the defining crises of our time, affecting not just ecosystems, but our safety, our health, and our livelihoods. In QC, or Quezon City, we've experienced firsthand the gravity of plastic crisis. But we've also seen and exemplified the power of local action, especially in terms of bold policy, coordinated action, and public engagement. I'm Dorothy Delarmente, and today I'm honored to walk you through our journey in building a plastic-free Quezon City through legislation and beyond. To set the stage, allow me to share some context about Quezon City. QC is the most populous city in the Philippines, home to approximately 3.2 million residents and the largest in Metro Manila by land area. As a key center for education, politics, and economy, the city faces the complex challenge of balancing rapid growth with sustainability. Like many urban centers, QC contends with pressing environmental issues, including high population density, urban heat island effects, and rising resource demands, which carry significant social and economic costs. Among these challenges is the growing problem of plastic waste. When Typhoon Ketsana or Ondoy triggered massive floods in QC in 2009, it revealed the overwhelming presence of plastic waste, clogging drainages and scattered across communities after the floodwaters receded. Over time, this realization deepened. Microplastics are now found in our food, water, air, and even inside our bodies, a pervasive threat to our health, environment, and climate. In 2012, QC complemented its waste analysis and characterization study, which revealed that plastic bags made up 12% of the city's total waste composition. This finding prompted the city to establish a more effective system for plastic bag recovery and management. Over time, mounting scientific evidence has highlighted the harmful impacts of plastic pollution, reinforcing the urgency to act. Microplastics have been found in our food, water, air, and even inside our bodies, posing a widespread threat to human health, the environment, and the climate. Plastic pollution and its effects, from flooding because of improper waste management to poor health due to microplastics, are present-day realities everywhere, including in Quezon City. The plastic crisis calls for urgent action. So how are we in QC responding to this threat? Backed by strong political will, QC responded to the growing urgency of plastic pollution through the enactment of targeted legislation that aim to reduce plastic waste and promote environmental responsibility. Beginning in 2012, I had the privilege of authoring many of these ordinances, which positioned the city as an early mover, just as other local governments across the Philippines were starting to adopt similar regulations. The dark blue ones are authored by me, and the light blue ones co-sponsored by me. Believing that changing mindsets takes time, QC began its plastic regulation efforts in 2011 with an ordinance requiring all business establishments using plastic bags to display a sign at their counter stating, "Save the environment, bring your own recyclable or reusable bags." This soft approach recognized that behavior change doesn't happen overnight. Starting with a visible reminder helped raise awareness, encourage shared responsibility, and prepare both consumers and businesses for future regulations. It laid the groundwork for stronger policies by building public acceptance and signaling the city's long-term commitment to reducing plastic waste. This was followed by Ordinance SP 2140 series of 2012, or the Plastic Bag Reduction Ordinance, which required establishments to charge a 2 peso fee for each plastic bag used. This plastic recovery system fee was allocated to a green fund managed by retailers and used to support environmental initiatives such as urban greening programs, sustainable transport projects, and other sustainability efforts, all of which were regularly reported to the city. QC also enacted Ordinance SP 2202 series of 2013, which prohibited individuals and organizations, or specifically politicians or those running for office, from installing advertisement or propaganda materials made of polyethylene within QC. Instead, PVC tarpaulins are allowed, which is a high-strength fabric covered on both sides with a thin coating of polyvinyl chloride. This makes the material highly waterproof and durable, thus reusable and convertible into sturdy products such as bags. So I'm very proud to say that since 2013 until last month's election, there were no plastic campaign propaganda materials in Quezon City. Those were among our first ordinances, important starting points in raising public awareness and promoting more sustainable plastic recovery efforts. But based on what we've seen on the ground, what we've heard from our communities and partners, and the growing concern on plastic pollution, we realized that we had to do more and that we are capable of doing more. That's why we move towards stronger, more responsive ordinances to intensify our fight against the plastic crisis and confront the realities we face today. QC began with measures that aimed to raise awareness and promote the recovery of plastic bags. But as we gained experience and the urgency of the crisis grew clearer, this early effort evolved into a stronger, more decisive policy on banning the use, sale, and distribution of plastic as carry-out bags for Type 1 under the Business Permits and Licensing Department and Type 2 under the Market Development and Administration Department retailers. Plastic labo, or plastics without handles, are exempted for wet goods. We also moved into prohibiting other types of materials, single-use plastics and disposable materials like plastic cutlery, straws, and dishware for dine-in transactions at food establishments and hotels. In procuring goods, services, and infrastructure, Ordinance SP 3107 series of 2021 mandates the inclusion of at least one environmental criteria. When it comes to plastic reduction and circular economy efforts, these include but not limited to use of reusable dishware, use of recycled or repurposed furniture, provision of a waste recovery and recycling mechanism after events, provision of water dispenser. By doing so, the city government is not just lessening plastic waste, it's actively building demand for more sustainable alternatives. Earlier this year, QC released an executive order that aims to reduce plastic waste in the Quezon City government. In line with the applicable provisions in the previous ordinances, this EO mandates a prohibition of plastic bags, PET bottles, and unnecessary plastic delivery packaging inside every city-owned facility and events. Employees and guests are instead encouraged to bring eco bags, reusable food and beverage containers, and other sustainable alternatives. This EO also mandates city departments and offices to set up their own waste segregation system and trade at the trash to cashback booth or partner junk shop. The Trash to Cashback program is an initiative that encourages individuals to trade recyclables and single-use plastics for environmental points. These EPs can be redeemed for groceries, goods, and utilities. So far, we've talked about the backbone of our plastic regulation efforts, the ordinances that set the direction, but we know that good policy alone isn't enough. Real impact comes when the entire city government moves in sync. That's why Quezon City takes a comprehensive whole-of-government approach to plastic reduction. The plastic ordinances and EO are mainly enforced by deputized personnel from our Climate Change and Environmental Sustainability Department. These policies also set clear coordination mechanisms in making sure that they're effectively implemented and monitored. Enforcing EO number 3, for instance, involves security and utility personnel, CCESD's enforcement team, and the city's HR department to track compliance among offices and personnel. When the city organizes events, especially when there are merchants involved, lead organizing departments coordinate with CCESD to ensure partners are informed of plastic policies. Finally, whenever the city has events, both big and small, we never forget to include reminders to bring sustainable alternatives such as water tumblers. We just had our fun run, and imagine a fun run with no single-use plastics or PET bottles. Next week, we will be having our Pride March and Pride Month concert. And again, single-use plastics are also banned during the events. Enforcement is only one side of the equation. Just as important is building understanding and shifting mindsets. That's why we complement our policies with intensive education, awareness raising, and advocacy efforts for various stakeholders, empowering communities to become active partners in the fight against plastic pollution. For example, green practices orientations for 4Ps beneficiaries, covering topics such as energy efficiency, water conservation, practical tips on reducing plastic waste, and the Trash to Cashback program. Lasting change doesn't happen when the government works in isolation. What truly drives impact is the involvement of people. That's why we prioritize genuine stakeholder engagement and community participation, making sure solutions are shaped by those who live them. At its core, the city's efforts are guided by the principle of inclusive climate action. This extends to our work in the plastic sector. So how do we make sure that the road to reducing plastic waste is not leaving anyone behind? Number one, when we craft and implement policy and legislation, we make sure to conduct public consultations as mandated by the LGC. Inputs from stakeholders have been valuable, informing us how to better design and execute legislation on the ground. Number two, the QC People's Council gives over 5,300 CSOs across 23 sectors a seat at the table. Their representatives can participate in city decision-making bodies and take part in committee deliberations and evaluations. Three, multi-sectoral partnerships are crucial in the city's efforts. We engage everyone, from the private sector to the grassroots, to co-create solutions, build shared ownership, and amplify impact on the ground. For example, the Trash to Cashback program is implemented together with basic environmental systems and technologies are best. Ajinomoto also works with the city's Trash to Cashback program through its Sari Cycle program, which engages sari-sari stores to recover used sachets. These efforts further support the private sector in implementing their extended producer responsibility. Our legislation against plastic pollution is reinforced and made more effective through the city's initiatives that promote a circular economy. First, we have our bayong distribution, wherein we distribute bayong or traditional reusable woven bags to market goers. Second, Trash to Cashback program is an initiative that encourages individuals to trade recyclables and single-use plastics for environmental points. These EPs can be redeemed for groceries, goods, and utilities. And so far, 590,000 kilograms have been diverted from landfills, which is equivalent to a little more than 2 million EPs. Third, Refilling Initiative and Fill a Bottle or FAB engages thousands of sari-sari store owners in setting up hubs for refills of essential hygiene and cleaning products. This program has now evolved into FAB, which trains these micro-entrepreneurs to create and market their own products. Fourth, Tarpaulin Upcycling Initiative. Women deprived of liberty inside our correctional facilities are engaged to upcycle tarpaulins to stylish bags to support their livelihoods and eventual social reintegration, reinforcing our ban on plastic tarps. Fifth, textile recovery initiatives. It is also worth noting that textile waste is a growing concern. Polyester, for instance, is one of the most widely used type of plastic. So we have a project. First, the Kilos QC store is inspired by Paris's Kilo Shops. This initiative allows customers to buy pre-loved clothing items by weight, with proceeds supporting our city's learning recovery program. To date, it has raised over 2 million pesos for the tutoring support of more than 200 students. Second, we have clothes swap parties. The city has organized 2 clothes swap parties or events in City Hall, offering a fun social way for residents to exchange pre-loved clothing items, reduce waste, and embrace more sustainable consumption habits. At the helm of all these efforts is strong leadership. Leadership that's willing to listen, to innovate, and to act boldly. The City Council is proud to have the support of Mayor Joy Belmonte, who has consistently championed environmental responsibility in Quezon City. Her commitment inspires all of us to tackle plastic pollution and climate change head-on. In fact, the city's plastic reduction efforts earned her international recognition as the first elected official in the Philippines to be named a United Nations Environment Program Champion of the Earth for policy leadership, the UN's highest environmental honor. Quezon City's journey from promoting awareness to regulating use and now advancing circular solutions shows us just how far we've come. But we also recognize that challenges remain. Number 1, plastic use and sachet or tingi culture is deeply ingrained. Many Filipinos still rely on single-use plastic due to convenience, affordability, and deeply rooted habits, making behavior change a long-term effort. Number 2, with 142 barangays spread across 161 square kilometers, a population of over 3 million, and approximately 70,000 registered businesses or MSMEs, ensuring consistent implementation and monitoring across the city is a complex task. 3, the city has only a limited number of deputized enforcers, which makes it challenging to monitor compliance across its vast jurisdiction. 4, in the absence of a strong national policy, local governments bear the weight of addressing plastic pollution. A key limitation of the EPR law is that it focuses primarily on plastic collection and recovery, without directly addressing the need to reduce plastic production and consumption at the source. Nevertheless, these challenges present powerful opportunities to innovate, to collaborate, and to lead by example. So what's next for Quezon City? First, learning from our implementation experiences, identifying gaps in enforcement, listening to feedback, and integrating new evidences to strengthen our current ordinances. And second, we are also actively identifying and exploring opportunities for local legislation on issues such as single-use plastic bottles and textile waste to promote circularity and address fast fashion's environmental impact. Quezon City's journey in addressing the plastic crisis proves the power of policy. Not just any legislation, but policies that are bold, strategic, and forward-thinking. Yet policy alone is not enough. Its true power is unlocked when leaders commit to ambitious and inclusive action, government offices work in synergy, not in silos, and communities, businesses, and individuals come together as a collective force. This is the path forward. Local governments that lead not just with rules on paper, but with resolve, turning policies into action, action into progress, and progress into lasting change. So let us continue shaping a future that's sustainable, just, and truly shared. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I hope you learned something from the presentation. And like I said, it's just a real talk on the challenges, right? But I love how Councillor Dorothy ended by saying that there are challenges, yes, but we can reframe them as opportunities to innovate. Okay, so I know it is a difficult time, so I'm going to make you do a little something to wake up your brains. So this is a problem when I'm your moderator. I have to make it a little bit more interactive. So in our workshops, in the workshops that I run, we have these little interactive things called brain gym. So, you're sitting, you're on your phones, you're messaging, you're typing in your questions vigorously, but we also want other parts of your brain to work. So, let's play a color brain gym. It's very simple. You don't need skills for this, but I will ask a couple of my colleagues to demo. So can I have Jude and Harvey? So what you're going to do is you're going to find a pair. So just someone maybe you're sitting beside, and then we will assign a color. So the person on the right will be blue, and the person on the left will be green. So I will say the colors. So blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, and you will tap your hands against each other. When I shout the color, for example, I shout green, then you will catch the hand of the person who is the other color. Okay? I know it sounds confusing, so let's demo it. Ready? Okay, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue. Okay. Okay. My own teammates didn't understand the instructions. We rehearsed this earlier, I promise. Okay, so blue, Jude is blue, and Harvey is green. So when I shout the color, you will catch the other person. Okay? Red, understood? Okay. Blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue. Okay. So you're dead. Okay. All right. So can I have, you're out. Okay. Can I have people to stand up? Please leave your things on the chair and then find somebody right beside you. And the person on the left will be blue. The person on the right will be green. Okay? Ready? So, okay, one person is blue, one person is green. Ready? And go. Blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue. Guys, you have to be quicker. Okay, look for another person. Look for another person. Look for someone new, someone new. Okay, assign someone to be black and someone to be yellow. Someone is black and someone is yellow. Okay, when I shout the color, that is the one that needs to catch the other color. Okay? Black and yellow, black, yellow, black, yellow, black, yellow, black, yellow, black, yellow, black, yellow. Okay, one last. One last. Look for one more person. One last person. New person, new person. Okay. Pink and red. Assign someone to be pink and someone to be red. Ready? And pink, red, pink, red, pink, red, pink, red, pink, red, pink, red, red. Okay, thank you, everyone. Give yourselves a round of applause. Now I would like to call the speakers our presenters. Did that raise your heart rate a little bit? Okay, good. Because it's hard to be in a space with no windows, right? And then you're listening, you're sitting. So you need a little something to kind of like boost your energy. So I'd like to call on our three speakers to come here in front. So Councillor Dorothy, Rocky, and Sarah, they're already busy like exchanging contacts. And again, you can continue adding your questions. We already have 12 questions. Oh, how exciting. And then we will hear from Diane in a bit as our discussant. Okay, there. Okay, let's start with Rocky. There was a question for you earlier. Um, what are the key reasons for delaying the GPT from time to time? This question is from Daryl. No, sorry, HD from HD.
Thanks, Daryl. Actually, not from time to time, all the time. The whole time is getting delayed. Okay, so I'll focus. There are a number of things, but I'll focus on one thing, and I'll try to explain it because it's going to be a bit legalese. It's actually procedure. So the issue with the Global Plastics Treaty when it started is that there was a procedure wherein countries can decide what would be the final text. And the countries would try to decide everything by consensus. And if that's not possible, there is a provision that they could go into a vote. The vote would be a supermajority or two-thirds vote. But that has been a subject of contention for a long time. I remember in one negotiation, we spent 4 days just discussing that procedure, if it could be applied or not. Because a number of countries didn't want to put it in a vote. They wanted to put everything in consensus. So that has been a problem because there are really fundamental differences in positions among countries, specifically those states, high ambition states that wanted production caps, primary plastic polymers, and we have the like-minded group of oil-producing countries that wanted to focus on waste management. So unless this procedural issue is resolved, it might go on and on and on because there would be no resolution. If we try to go to consensus, no one wants to budge either side, there might not be any resolution for all. The resolution might be that we just focus on the things that we can agree on, which would be a low bar, and that would not be agreeable to a lot of high ambition countries. Now that's the main one. Another one, and also for a solution also, it's maybe to expedite things, it would be better to have like the ministry level negotiators also at that level because it would expedite things. Right now, it's a lot of working group level negotiators, which are usually the case for negotiations. But since it's of the essence right now, it might be good to be a little more snappy in decision making. So that might be a good way also of moving forward. And I think that's one of the resolutions of the Secretariat to have like more of a ministry level also decisions on the next negotiation round. So quickly, so those are the few things.
Okay, thank you, Rocky. There was this while you were explaining how it's a process issue, a procedure issue. I remember there was an advocate who told me before that these international negotiations are like tug of war. Like there has to be someone pulling on both ends so that at some point you meet in the center. So maybe in INC 5.2, you'll meet somewhere in the middle. Okay, so our next question is for Counselor Dorothy. You can get the mic here. This is from Daryl. Sorry, the question earlier was from HD. For Counselor Dorothy, how has Quezon City tracked or measured the impact of its actions? And this is a great question. Have there been any unintended consequences? So, for example, from banning plastics, there was a displacement to other material streams. So, for example, from banning plastics, there's more pressure on like use of paper. Maybe have you encountered that yet? Well, I think you have to turn it on.
I'll first answer the consequences. No, we started with like what I mentioned earlier. Back in 2012, we started first passing the ordinance wherein if you wanted if you buy something and you wanted the store to put it inside the plastic, you have to pay for the plastic bag for 2 pesos. I think I mentioned I was in Korea last week, and it's a practice also there in Seoul, and there were a lot of violent reactions when we passed that ordinance, because people were saying, why don't you just totally ban plastic instead of asking us to pay 2 pesos? It's like you're promoting plastic, the use of plastic. But we have to realize that in the Philippines, the Filipino culture, we cannot abruptly change the lifestyle of Filipinos. You have to do it gradually. So that's why we did that, because the ordinance is more of teaching them lifestyle change instead of at the time, instead of totally reducing the use of plastic. More of, we wanted to teach them lifestyle change. With regards to what was the question? The
How do you track the impact?
Ano-
Right. And then has there any been unintended consequence, like placing, for example, if you ban plastics, there's more pressure on other materials like, I don't know, paper
Yeah.
or glass?
So first we didn't ban it, we regulated it, and we totally banned plastics in 2019, right before the pandemic. Um, yes, there was pressure. First, they wanted paper bags, but we didn't want to put paper bags as an alternative to plastics, because it's paper is also waste. So we really wanted people to bring their own bags instead. And also, there was also clamor for us to ban styrofoam, materials. But we haven't banned it yet, because for us, there's no alternative yet. At the time, there's no alternative yet for the material that if we ban it. And with regards to tracking,
Yeah. How do you monitor? Um, how has QC tracked or measured the impact of its actions?
well, first we based it on the 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 stores, for example, the department stores or the markets. We base it on when we were first back in 2012, when we first regulated the use of plastics. We based it on the EP points, or the environmental on the green fund. So yun nga, the 2 pesos goes to the green fund, and for example, a certain department store, they use their green fund. It doesn't go to the government. Instead, the green fund, they use it for their environmental programs. So for example, I remember a certain department store used their green fund to purchase their solar lights. So yun. So we base it on the amount of green fund we collected at the time. So that's back in 2012. That's our one way for us to track and the usage of plastics.
Great, thank you. So there are some ways it can be monetary, like the funds, or it can be the volume, let's say. So for Sarah, has ROK encountered cases of market failure? For example, where the recovered recyclable is priced out of the current international market prices and hence cannot be sold.
Yeah, I think that was very first question that I got received, and I was very surprised. Like, this person has to be an economic background.
The question comes from Daryl.
Yeah.
Are you an economist?
So I have thought about the market failure in terms of selling the plastics, and I realized that there are subsidies at the local government level. And for example, the local governments, for like Seoul metropolitan governments, they provide a concessional loans to the recycling companies to do the to cover the operational cost or the other necessary costs that are incurred during the operations, and they provided with the 0% interest rate with the 3 to 5 years of grace periods. So, but you might have these questions, then how the Seoul metropolitan government have this budget? Then these budgets are generally coming from the waste bags. The waste bags, 90% of the bags revenue is coming under the government budgets, and the rest of 10% is for the manufacturer distributions and the transaction cost. So the major role, the government is playing the major role in terms of the waste management in Korea. So I would say that it's the local governments that compensates the losses if they if occurs at the recycling companies.
Great, thank you. Okay, this is something for all of you. I want to ask this, well, it wasn't addressed to anyone specifically, but then I think it applies to all the work that you're doing. How can the transition to a circular plastics economy be made equitable? What measures can ensure that informal waste sector workers are meaningfully included in the transition? So, Rocky, in the GPT, there's always a topic on the just transition, right? Like making sure that the informal waste sectors are somehow included. Same with the local government. And well, Sarah had a slide earlier on the integration of informal waste workers. So maybe now you can talk a little bit more about it.
Yes, a very important question and has been cropping up again in this global conversations as well. As I've said, there are a few agreeable provisions, waste management, and fortunately, just transition is one of them. And so there has been a growing consensus, actually a consensus that we should have specific provisions on just transition, including improving the plight of the informal waste sector throughout the whole life cycle of plastics. And this is good, especially if we have specific provisions in that, and that would lead to having possibly an implementation plan in the implementation later on to ensure that there would be possibly what we call like minimum standards or labor standards or insurance provisions and all these safeguards for the informal waste sector that could be set as a minimum standard at the global scale, and that could be cascaded down at the national level. So here at this level, at least there is some discussions going on. The specific granularity might be up to the states itself on how to implement it, but it's good that we have this conversation at this global level to ensure the mainstreaming of safeguards for the informal waste sector, for youth, for all marginalized sectors that are affected in the entirety of the plastics value chain. So at the global level, we have that at least.
And from what I've heard in your talks, this is one of the, like, it's not contentious to make sure that there is a just transition. So in general, countries are supportive of having a just transition. Councillor?
Well, I guess in Quezon City, I also mentioned earlier, most of our projects and most of our programs, we also consider our informal waste sector. Also, we mentioned EPRs a while ago. We have an EPR here in Quezon City, but in the Philippines. But the problem is, in our law, it only involves big corporations. Yeah. So most of the businesses in Quezon City are the small ones. That's why we made sure to with the programs and projects, we help and target the small, nano and micro businesses also.
Great, because in the Philippines, it's the obliged enterprises, so they're the really big companies. But then, yeah, worth millions and millions. But in the Philippines, actually, majority of businesses are micro, small, medium, nano. So that's a big challenge for implementation.
Yeah, I totally agree with the previous speakers because the having just transition in the waste management, integrating this informal workers into the formal system was one of the biggest challenges that Korea faced as well, and having them under the formal system means that there should be a data, and also having this minimum labor standards. I checked the minimum wages for the waste pickers, and some of them are considered as a public officers if they are under the contracts with the local government. So they are guaranteed with this the benefits and allowances that are enjoyed by the other workers, and also those informal waste collectors who want to remain in the waste picking industries. They are connected to the social enterprises. Having these networks, they can guarantee these market prices. So I think it's also coming back with the role of the governments. They should play a critical role, and also having this regular information sessions with these enterprises. The benefits and allowances should be ready for this waste pickers in the informal sector.
Yeah. Thank you. So we'll have one more round of questions. I'll go back to the question that was posed earlier when we did the AHA slides for Rocky. Why do you think there is a global plastics treaty specific to plastics? Why wasn't it like a global solid waste treaty? Yeah, why is there so much focus on plastics? Oh, it's yeah, yeah, right?
That's a very hard question, and it also boils down to the international legal framework that we have right now. Actually, we have other international agreements that deal with some aspects of plastic. For example, for waste trade, plastic waste trade, we have the Basel Convention. For possibly pollution from ships, we have the Marpol Convention.
Right.
But we don't have something that looks at the entire life cycle of plastics. And that was specifically identified in the UNEA resolution in 2022 to cover, the life cycle being including production, all the way down to waste management. So this agreement, this potential agreement, would look at that specific issues covering all those. For others, waste trade, you can have that in other agreements. But for the entirety of the life cycle, there is still a gap that this treaty seeks to fill in the entirety of the international legal framework. And hopefully, it will actually cover the whole life cycle of plastic as it was intended to be. So we'll have to take a look on how that plays out later. But yeah.
Okay, so life cycle and the entire life cycle of plastics, which is already complicated to begin with, right? So for Councillor Dorothy, is Quezon City looking into incentivizing domestic circularity over export of plastic resin to textile markets? Okay, again. Is Quezon City looking into incentivizing domestic circularity over export of plastic resin to textile markets? Okay, let's change the question. I'm also rereading it and I was like, let me try to. Okay, here's another question. Can you share with us Quezon City's consumer targeted advocacy programs on circular economy? So more consumer facing or like individual or resident facing campaigns.
The campaigns.
Yes.
Okay. I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite is the before we call it yung makuha ka sa tingi. But now it's like ano diba? The Filipinos are used to using sachets or buying small items because it's more affordable and they're used to that. But one of my favorite campaigns is that in sari-sari stores, we encourage them, instead of selling those small sachets or small bottles, instead they just use the refillable ones, and then the households just buy and then they just refill their containers.
Yeah, so refilling as an alternative delivery method.
Yes.
There's actually going to be a talk tomorrow on the business case of refilling, so I hope you come back and listen to that. And then finally, for Sarah, when Korea developed the EPR law, what were the major factors taken into account? Was there community and household waste generation data used? And did Korea establish a monitoring system?
Yeah, I think that's three questions.
Yes, okay.
There must be three questions. Yeah, but the major factors the Korean government took into consideration would be the implementability, because this waste management has to be sustainably supported by having mobilizing funds, but without compromising the government budgets. So which means of mobilizing the private capital is one of the factors. So which is that they need to have this data, but it's not the data that refers to the household level, but also we have a household level data. For example, the waste bags or RFID, they are all measured, and for example, the construction materials, the debris, they are also monitored by the Olbaro system, because this the source of waste, they have to encode the information in the system, which is monitored by the accredited agencies. Then it has to be synchronized with the recycling volumes. It also applies to the circulation resource circulation platform, which one I mentioned, which is operated by the K-Eco. For example, the resource circulations, the recycling companies, they encode the performance, and the obliged enterprises, they also encode information, and these are both monitored by the agency and also the K-Eco. And the last question was,
Did Korea establish a monitoring system?
yeah, the platform is one of the main channels that monitors the compliance. And K-Eco does is physically and digitally. Physically, they visit and has the inspections at the recycling companies, as well as at the responsible producers. Yeah.
Okay, thank you everyone. So please, let's give a round of applause for our three speakers. We hope that you learned a lot from them. I certainly did and enjoyed their presentation. So before you exit the stage, could we have a group photo just here in front? Just a quick photo, and then we will call our discuss. Wow, he just appeared. Thank you. Yes, thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Now for our unofficial closing remarks. Unofficial closing remarks. We are going to have a short reaction from our discussant. Dian Cornawati is the founder of PT 3D Oasis Group and Vice President and Director of PT Alba 3D Plastics Recycling Indonesia. And she is armed with a dual background in engineering and management and leverages over 8 years of experience in global business consulting experience across diverse industries. Diane will be speaking tomorrow, but for now, let's hear her short reaction on the presentations delivered this afternoon. Okay, let's all welcome Diane.
Thanks, Anna, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, and thank you for all the speakers. Congratulations for the panelists for a thought-provoking set of presentation. For me, in the short, the comment is, wow, that's very heavy topic. And as someone who worked directly in private sector, building recycling infrastructure in Indonesia, especially plastics recycling, and also engaging informal workers. So I think legal frameworks here is can or should be as enabler to move us beyond only small or pilot implementation, but how these legal frameworks can enable this into scalable, inclusive, and circular system. So I would like to reflect one by one. First on the GPT or Global Plastics Treaty. I think GPT, as what Rocky and Anna mentioned, is very historical achievement, hopefully by this August final version. But as the presentation highlighted, there is a growing divide, right? Some nations are calling for upstream controls like production caps, while others focus on downstream waste management. For me, for countries like developing countries like Indonesia, the Philippines, or others, the challenge lies not in the ambition part, but in the implementation. So treaty commitments must be matched with financing, policy coherence, and obviously the local capacity to implement. One of the example is ADB's $500 million policy-based loan in marine debris can be a good example how financial institution, especially development finance, can help countries prepare the legal and institutional foundation to make this treaty work on the ground. So yeah, to make it scalable, private sector need regulatory clarity and predictability to confidently expand, especially for investment in circular project. And the second one, very interesting one, is the Korea's EPR system by Sarah. I think this is one of the good example where what happens where regulations really can build and enable actual market. In that example, we see how all stakeholders are aligned. Producers are legally bound, recyclers are incentivized, and the whole system is digitally traceable. That's how I see it. And as Sarah mentioned, one of the key success factor is it's implemented in the phases. So it's not like one time. We see that it was started in 1986 for the first regulation. So I think, however, it's more than a compliance tool as an EPR. And the key challenge in these developing countries as well, from the sourcing side as it involves informal sector, and also on the producer side, like in Indonesia, more than 80% economies are coming from medium small enterprise. So how then EPR can integrate and recognize these actors? Otherwise, we can risk that this is good, technically sound, but socially exclusive. So it's not inclusive. And then next one on the Quezon City. This is a very good example how cities can innovate from the ground. Shows why it works through the key factor is because it involves the people itself. However, we see that local policies also need support national frameworks. Otherwise, cities will face enforcement gaps, limited funding, and policy fragmentation between cities or province. So we see here cities are innovation labs. However, to become national wide, they need structural support and again, policy alignment. And last, from private sector perspective, I think all the policy should not only focus on the supply side, but also how to secure the market. So we urgently need demand side regulations such as minimum recycled content, public procurement target, or incentive that try to or tied to circular performance. I think the way I see it is it's the same playbook we saw with EV or electric vehicles. So the demand can increase or surge only after governments introduce fleet mandates, tax credit, and emission standards. Otherwise, like what one of the question in the panelists just now, if the market is going down and then recycled plastic materials cannot sell or have loss, someone has to subsidize, and no one wants to subsidize. I mean, in Korea, the government can subsidize. However, this regulation should enable this demand side. So it's not only regulation that focusing on how to manage waste, but how to build the market. So if we can achieve that, then probably we can create this triple bottom line effect that people always say people, planet, profit. So that's so far my reflection. At the end, yes, it should work on the economic wise as well, not only on the environment or social, because otherwise difficult to sustain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. We'll see you again on stage tomorrow. And that is a wrap for our track one, but don't leave yet because I have announcements.